Welcome to a special episode of Trial Law Review. Joining me again today on Trial Law Review is Joey Coleman. He is a recovering trial lawyer, but that isn't why I was delighted when he agreed to be on the podcast again to discuss his new book. As I told you before, when top organizations all over the world need to boost their customer experience, they call on Joey for assistance. He is the creator of The First 100 Days, a system that's designed to dramatically increase your customer retention and as a result, your law firm's bottom line. If you didn't watch my last episode with Joey, if you're listening to this, go back and watch it because it's great. But now he's turned his attention to addressing retaining employees. This special episode is about his new book on retaining key talent. So my questions will be targeted around that topic for Joey to help law firms. His new book is entitled Never Lose an Employee Again and launches on June 27th. But you can pre-order the book right now on Barnes & Noble and on Amazon. Joey, I wanted to welcome you back to Trial Law Review in this special episode focusing on creating a high-performing team.
Jason, thanks so much for the kind introduction. Thanks to everybody who's willing to listen again. And I feel like, I don't know about you, I'm dating myself a little bit, like when we were growing up and they were like, on a very special episode of Family Ties, or whatever it means. So I feel honored to have a special episode jumping in here to talk about the new book and what we can do to keep those employees that we so desperately need to be able to have our firms achieve their goals and practice the kind of law we want to practice.
And so as a business owner, and I think I'm not alone, most employers would love it if their team members cared about their business as much as they do. And I think the reverse is true. Most team members want the owner of the business to care about each of them as much as they do about the business itself. How do law firms avoid that kind of disconnect?
Well, I think first, Jason, to your point, we acknowledge that, yes, we want our employees to care more about the firm, but we also need to acknowledge our employees want the firm to care about them. I think the main way we can avoid the disconnect, though, is to realize that lip service isn't enough. Telling our employees that we care just isn't enough. You can't on one hand say, hey, we're a firm that really cares about our people, but we're going to need you to bill 2,200 hours this year. Okay, those two things are antithetical. And I'm sorry, I realize I just irritated a lot of listeners with my opening comment. But the practical reality of things are a lot of the ways law firms have been traditionally structured was not in the employee's best interest. It was in the firm's best interest and often the partner's best interest. Those days are gone. And I'm sorry they're gone, and I empathize that many folks out there are frustrated and wish it could go back to the days of yesteryear when, when I was coming up, this is how we did things. I appreciate that, but that's not the marketplace anymore. And what I know about lawyers, what lawyers are at the best really good at when a lawyer's behaving at their optimal version of themselves is recognizing the facts of the case in front of them and recognizing, here's what I've got. This is what I have to deal with. Now, I don't know. I used to be a criminal defense trial lawyer, Jason. There are plenty of times where I wish the facts were different than what I had. Plenty of times where I wish there wasn't, body cam footage or a dash cam footage or, whatever evidence that might be there. But if you really want to succeed, you have to acknowledge the facts. And the facts are that the employer today has a different level of expectation for what they want from their employer than they've had in the past. And that's not going back to the old ways. It's only going to accelerate from here.
Yeah, and I remember my last job in a traditional law firm setting and the pressure to bill and what that felt like as a young lawyer. I really can't imagine that the newer generations that are in the workforce, given what I know about those newer generations, will tolerate that. I mean, it just, that has changed.
It has changed. And here's the thing, Jason, and I say this respectfully, I really do. It didn't work back then either. It's just we were more willing to accept it. Let's take it out of the legal context briefly, if I may. Lots of times when we think about doctors and doctors doing their residency or their internship, we hear these stories of doctors working 30 hours straight, 40 hours straight. We also know as lawyers, especially anybody that's working in medical malpractice or those type of industries, that we don't want to get the doctor at the end of the shift. We want to get the doctor at the beginning of the shift. If we can look at the medical profession and say, that was insane, why do we not think the same behavior isn't just equally as insane when applying it to a law firm? We want the lawyer who's fresh. We want the lawyer who's at the beginning of the 12-hour billable block, not the end of the 12-hour billable block. And so I think the results that we're trying to achieve would actually be increased and magnified if we put a little bit of the employee experience in the equation earlier in the conversation.
So, how can a law firm owner get straight A's in terms of the employment journey for their team members with their firm based upon what you've outlined in your book?
Well, Jason, for folks who aren't familiar with the employee journey that I outline, I believe there are 8 phases that an employee has the potential to go through, and they all start with the letter A. And to your point, it's kind of like if you get each of those phases right, it's like getting straight A's from your employees. And I know a lot of employers are paying attention to young associates' grades coming out of law school and seeing if they made law review and where they're at. I think if we focus on each of these phases, we have the opportunity to get high marks. If I may, I'll give a brief overview of the 8 phases just to set a context for our conversation. And also, as you're listening to these folks, maybe consider which of these phases you're doing good things in right now and which might be phases that you need to improve on. Or maybe there might even be some phases that you hadn't even thought of before. The first phase is the assess phase. This is where a prospective employee is trying to decide whether or not they want to come work at your firm. Whether it's a lawyer or a member of the support team, they're looking at your job description. They're checking out the About Us page on your website. They might be reading reviews online or going to your social media profiles. They're then applying, submitting their resume, and going through your interview process. In the assess phase, we want to give them an experience of what it will be like to actually work with us. The way we differentiate ourselves in the marketplace is not by we have a bigger practice group, we have more lawyers, we pay more, we give more vacation. No, the way we want to differentiate ourselves is by saying the experience of being here is not like the experience of being over there. And whatever we can do to preview that in the assess phase, it's going to work in our best interest. The next phase is the accept phase. In the accept phase, the firm extends an offer to a desired candidate, and the candidate accepts our offer. What are we doing to make sure that feels like an invitation to the next chapter in their life instead of just a transactional activity? We then come to the affirmed phase. Now, I'd be willing to bet that most of the people watching or most of the people listening are familiar with the phrase buyer's remorse. I'd like to introduce you potentially to a new concept called new hires remorse. The research and the science shows that the same things that a consumer feels after making a purchase when they experience buyer's remorse are felt by a new employee after they accept the job offer. They begin to doubt the decision they just made. Should they have negotiated for a better benefits package? Should they have waited until they heard from the other places they were interviewing with before they accepted this offer? If you don't counteract those natural feelings of fear, doubt, and uncertainty in the new hires remorse affirm phase, you're in big trouble, because they'll show up for the first day on the job emotionally and mentally in the hole in terms of what they're feeling about this next gig, which interestingly enough does bring us to the first day on the job, the activate phase, phase 4 in the 8-phase journey. We're about halfway through the journey, folks, and we're just to the first day on the job. On the first day on that job, what are you doing to make sure that that employee has something to talk about? What do I mean by that? Well, the immortal song by Bonnie Raitt, Give 'Em Something to Talk About, should be our guiding principle on day one. You want that employee to be able to go home to their roommate, their spouse, their children, their parents, whoever it is they're living with. And when they say, how was the first day at work? They've got something to talk about. Something that isn't, well, I sat in a conference room and read policy manuals for 3 hours, or I watched some videos about how not to do sexual harassment in the workplace that were filmed in the 70s, and I don't know why they're still showing us this. Do people actually do this stuff? Is it that big of a deal that we need to be showing the videos? Give them something positive to talk about. We then come, Jason, to phase 5, the phase where, again, many employers, especially law firms, start to fall apart. In most organizations, there is someone who's responsible for day one of a new employee's day on the job. In most organizations, no one is responsible for day 2 or day 4 or day 10 or day 20. In this early stage, those first few weeks and months, the new employee is getting up to speed. They're learning our cadence of communications. They're learning what the roles and responsibilities are, who they work with, who they report to. You've got to hold their hand and help them acclimate to your way of doing business. We then come to phase 6, the accomplish phase, when the employee accomplishes the goal they had when they originally decided to accept the job offer. Now, pro tip here, friends, that goal they're hoping to accomplish is not a paycheck. Yes, they want to be paid, of course, but that's not enough to keep someone in a job long term. They want to feel progress. They want to feel a sense of potentiality, a future, motion, moving up in terms of their career, their title, their responsibilities, their opportunities. What are we doing to help celebrate when they achieve those? If they accomplish goals, we have the opportunity to bring them into the adopt phase, phase 7, when the employee becomes loyal to us and only us. They're not going to take that recruiter or headhunter's call. They're not jumping to another firm. They're bought in. And last but not least, we reach the 8th phase, the holy grail, nirvana, the advocate phase, where our employee becomes a raving fan singing our praises far and wide. They're going on Glassdoor and other review sites and writing reviews about our firm. That whenever we have an open position in the firm, they're getting their friends, their colleagues, their family members to apply for that position and come in and be part of the team. If we do it right, we can navigate someone through all 8 phases. But we've got to be intentional about it and focus at each step in the journey.
So from our last conversation, you talked about the importance of the first 100 days. Can you talk about it and its importance to a law firm in terms of, in this context, never losing an employee again?
So what's interesting, Jason, is a significant amount of employees who leave will leave very quickly. Depending on whose research you look at and what type of position we're talking about, that number is somewhere between 20 and 70%. 20 to 70% of new employees will quit the job before the 100-day anniversary. In fact, 4% will come for the first day on the job, go home that night, and never come back again. 4% of employees go one day and never again. These numbers are staggering. But what was more frightening to me, Jason, than figuring out these numbers, which cut across all industries globally, every country, every type of business you could imagine, is that the typical business owner or leader had no idea what their percentage was, and they weren't tracking the speed at which people left. They felt the pain when someone left, but they never associated that pain with the lack of foundational growth, the lack of an onboarding process. See, I think most business owners and law firms, to be candid, are pretty guilty of this. Confuse the word orientation with onboarding. Orientation is helping somebody to get used to their surroundings. Where's the bathroom? How long is the lunch break? Where do I go if a fire alarm goes off? Interestingly enough, this is what happens in the first few hours on a cruise ship if you go on a cruise. You're not going to be living on the cruise forever. You're there for a week. And this is orientation. Onboarding, however, is inviting in new employees through a managed, structured series of contacts that are designed to create a warm, welcoming experience. I know lawyers like dissecting words, so let's play with it a little bit. Inviting in, not starting, not the beginning. It's an invitation to join something bigger than yourself, using a managed, structured series of contacts, not a haphazardly thrown together, oh, well, if the managing partner happens to be here that day, you'll have a great first day, but if they're out on a case on the West Coast, sorry, we'll just have to wait to have you have any sense of connection or recognition until they get back. Designed to create a warm, welcoming experience, not an orientation experience, but a welcoming experience. Warmth. You're part of the team. You're part of the family now. We want you to feel connected and appreciated and valued here. There's a difference between orientation and onboarding, and more organizations could benefit from thinking a little bit about a robust onboarding program instead of a haphazard orientation program.
Yeah, and what's interesting just about all of this is I think there's a lack of line of sight to the cost of not doing these things. Having team members that don't ramp as quickly, have team members that ultimately leave, and the amount of time we spend working with someone, bringing them onto the team, if we don't keep them, the cost of that turnover is immense for any organization. Law firms are not exempt from that.
Absolutely, Jason. It's staggering. In fact, in 2021, the research shows that American businesses in the United States, lost $700 billion with a B, billion dollars due to turnover. If we break it down to the more specific granular employee level as opposed to across all industries, research from the Society for Human Resource Professionals and a number of other employment research surveys show that the cost of replacing an employee, the practical hard dollars cost, is somewhere between 100 and 300% of the annual salary. So when you have an employee leaving, you need to be seeing that impact as being 3x their annual salary. That's before, to your point, we even get to any of the emotional cost, any of the cost of the other employees who are left behind having to pick up the slack and now they're overworked and burned out and frustrated. Or worse, looking at that person who left and saying, well, what did Jason know that I didn't know? He left. Does he see some writing on the wall I wasn't aware of? Is he privy to information I'm not familiar with? And they begin to doubt their own employment status, which creates a morale issue that just spins and spins and doesn't have good resolution.
Since this is trial law review, I wanted to ask you a bit of an open-ended question. So what's your view as an expert when it comes to employee experience for law firms?
My opinion as an expert on employee experience is that too many law firms are operating as if it was 1983. With all due respect, the marketplace has changed. The landscape has changed. The tools you're using have changed. The expectations of your clients have changed. And yet so many law firms still have the same expectations, especially of their junior associates and their support staff. We need to recognize that we are playing a different game with different rules in a different arena. And the firms that recognize this and make the shift and make the change are going to be the firms that exist 50 years from now, instead of the firms that are closing their door because they just couldn't keep their talent.
You are going to do an upcoming webinar for lawyers. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of detail and what they'll hear in that webinar? Because this was just a brief introduction to these topics. I'd love for listeners to understand what they can expect if they attend the webinar.
Oh, Jason, I so appreciate that. Yeah, as a recovering attorney, one of the things I'd love to be is part of the solution. I'd love to help law firms figure this out. And while I like to think that the new book, Never Lose an Employee Again, details a framework and a structure for applying this in your firm, I recognize that lawyers, and I say this from a place of love, believe that their firm is different. Their situation is different. Joey, you got to understand, I got to tell you 5 things about my firm before you can actually give me the advice. And I appreciate that, and I want to know. So we've created the space to do that. For anybody that pre-orders a copy of Never Lose an Employee Again and sends the receipt to Help Me Joey, HELPME, Joey, help me Joey at joeycoleman.com with the subject line, the law firm experience, you're going to be invited to a private session where you can ask me anything. We're going to review the things we talk about in the book. We're going to dive deeper into the 8 phases and specific ideas that law firms can use to enhance the employee experience across the journey. But more importantly, about half of that time together is going to be spent answering your questions. What are the pressing employment issues you have right now with your firm, and how can we make it better? I like to think for the cost of buying a single copy of a book, to be able to get that kind of access, insight, and advice, and also be able to connect with the other people who are going to be on the call, that your return on investment is going to be really solid. And if you can't make that call, which is going to be on June 19th at 2 p.m. Eastern, don't worry. The call is going to be recorded so you can watch it at your leisure. You'll be getting the book because you pre-ordered it. It'll be coming to you when the book comes out at the end of June. And my goal, like I said, is just to help law firms get better at creating the kind of remarkable employee experiences that will not only attract top talent to your firm, but will make it easier for you to keep those folks on the team long term.
It's an incredible offer because having experienced you working personally with my team here at Synergy in the process of customer experience, that's a very, very valuable offer for law firms. So I hope that our listeners will take advantage of that, because just that alone is certainly worth the price of admission for sure. Thanks, Joey, for joining me today. And this is a good little teaser for the webinar coming up at the end of the month.
Alrighty. Thanks so much, Jason. And thanks to everybody for listening in. Again, check out Never Lose an Employee Again. Send your receipt to help me, Joey, at joeycoleman.com, and we'll give you all the information you need to log in and access the exclusive live session we're going to do for lawyers and law firms only. No non-lawyers on the call. We're all going to be hanging out together, working on your law firm's experience.
And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Trial Lawyer Review, and we'll see everybody on the next one.